And we're back. So I wanted to ask you about. I asked you about World War Z, and there's something I wanted to kind of do a callback to that because I have to tell you about the speed of zombies. I loved World War Z, especially those big set pieces and what happens in Israel. It's awesome. And they loved it too because that's all they showed in the trailers was the zombies against the wall.
Yeah.
But there's I like my zombies fast. Like in my novels, the zombies are like 28 days later speed. They're still
Okay.
human.
Yeah.
But when I watch that, I feel like it's going to be great in DVD where you can slow it down and actually see what's happening. Because it's like when the Transformers transform, or in Starship Troopers when all the insects are coming all at you all at once. It's this kind of visual assault where you go, a lot's happening, but I don't know what's going on. I can't see
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
So
I think we're too old. I think the younger kids are like, oh, and that's taking. I'm that person driving on the highway at 30 miles an hour, and I feel like I'm going way too fast. But
you
the
driving Miss
kids in
Daisy?
these films, yeah, the kids in these films are like, that Transformer's taking forever. Like it still looks like a car. And for us, we're like, what just happened? I think it's our brain processing speed probably is.
I don't know.
We're not at Michael Bay level.
I think it was the Slate Cultural Gab Fest. Maybe the way they talked about, or maybe it was a review on. It was some Slate podcast where they were talking about World War Z, and or as in Canada we say World War Z, and they talked about how the zombies. I don't like the way they move because they seem to move with supernatural speed. And the only other thing that kind of bothered me was there's all these explosions. Like when the movie starts, there's all these explosions, and whenever that happens in a movie, in a horror movie, I go, "How are the
What?
zombies creating all these
Yeah. What
explosions?
caused that?
What's
Yeah. I
going
know
on there?"
in Israel, it looks like they're throwing bombs in, but everywhere else, it's almost like they're like leaving the pilot on, and then I don't
Yeah,
know, like bumping into the to the water heater, and who knows what's going on. Because every now and then it's just like, okay, like we need more fireballs here,
yeah.
and so the CGI department just had more fireballs. But I had the same feeling actually. I was thinking, okay, so how did that? What just blew up there? Why did that
I,
happen?
I,
Oh,
I
but the
think. Sorry.
supernatural thing that is kind of a problem because like they'll hit a bus and like five people will tip over a Greyhound bus, and you
Yeah,
wonder what what part of their musculature and their skeletal frame is allowing them to do something that you know I I mean that's why you're not supposed to think about these things too much. You're just supposed to like eat your popcorn
yeah.
and feel
Just
but you
let it
feel
wash over
terrified for
you.
the one guy that you care about while 10 billion people are dying and you don't care about those people. It's just like,
Yeah.
but what's going to happen to Brad Pitt? Is he going to be okay? Oh, the whole other plane died. I don't shed a tear for them, but like he's got a boo boo. Oh, it looks so painful. Everyone else got sucked out in the fuselage at 10,000 feet.
Well, it's funny how those tropes seem to come in clusters. Like if you want to see a hole in the side of a plane, all you have to do is watch that, or Iron Man 3, or
Yeah,
But but
yeah.
oh, what I was going to say about the slate,
They probably
the
both came from Lost. If you think about it,
yeah.
that scene was incredible.
But with the slate commentary, they were saying that if you look at the zombies coming up the wall in Israel, she described it as like a sculpture, a moving sculpture, and it was like they were one organism. And if you think of them like a, a bunch of army ants coming up the wall, that kind of makes it a little more palatable to me. But I like my zombies at 28 days later speed. I think that's perfect speed
Yeah, that's a good speed.
because they're
That
still
was
humans.
I love that movie, and I have a friend who is really into horror, and he's like, this goes back to something you were saying earlier about most horror fans. Do they just want to see something disgusting? That's my friend, and that's most of the horror um, people that I know that he hangs out with. All the conversations they have, they almost are pulling for the bad guy. Like they want to see really awful kill scenes, which is that's not a mentality that I can empathize with. I don't. I want people to survive. I'm pulling for the good guys, but a lot of them go into it just wanting to see the how brutal and how creative the kill can be. And in the case of zombies, like he just does not think 28 days later zombies are even zombies. They have to be slow, even though some of the guys who created the most canonical works have later made, films where some of the zombies move faster. So you can really argue this to the cows come home. But I'm like you. I feel like the immediacy of a zombie that can run after you is more terrifying than the plodding, the inexorable tide of like there's only so long. I look at the original zombies, the slow zombies, as like a metaphor for death.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can go crawl in the corner and barricade and get your gun. You can do whatever you want to do to try to prepare yourself. But there's so many of them, and they're never going to stop. They're eventually going to get you. They're like the Reaper. And that, as a metaphor for artistic sensibilities, that is awesome. For making me sit at the edge of my seat, terrified about what's going to happen next, 28 days later, and even World War Z do that more than some of the classic zombie works. And I'm not going to win any, classic horror fans over by stating that opinion, but I think there's a lot of people who would agree with me just on what's more entertaining.
Yeah, I've heard some people kind of dump on zombies, and what I love about them, love about zombies.
What's so sexy about them?
Yeah, well, I like the 28 days later kind of thing. So it's because it's like rabies, right? So or the rage virus or whatever, because that seems like vaguely plausible to me, but. I kind of think of zombies in all these the best stories that I like as kind of like the Ghost in the Darkness. They're for people who don't know the story or haven't seen the movie, it's two rogue lions who killed 140 people in 1898 who were trying to build a railway in rural India. And
that's supposed to they got a taste for man, or
that's right. Yeah, it's this force of nature, and you're always in danger if you're just whether you're in your tent or hiding out, you're always in danger. That pressure is always there, but it's this force of nature that just goes on and on. Like you can run at a breath, they can't.
Right.
And that's, I think there's something kind of appealing about that. I particularly like apocalyptic fiction. Like I remember or dystopian fiction. Like I remember reading 1984 and thinking, yeah, I can see that happening. And some people would say it has happened.
Well, especially, recently with the NSA, and what's great is
Hi NSA.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, hello. I saw this great joke on, God, I want to get this idea to the president. How can I get him to read this? And it's like, just save it as a draft in your inbox. Don't actually send it to anybody. You get right to them. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's great that they have so much material now where they can really, the fact that Microsoft is part of this program, and they're getting ready to sell me a console that has a camera that comes with the console and has to be on, and it just looks into your living room all the time. If you believe this stuff, man, that must, you're like, I love video games and I can't own this thing because I'm just terrified. It's like watching me and my family all the time. So we live in really crazy times. And if you've got a vivid imagination, you could drive yourself nuts with it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who are most worried about it sound crazy, but they sound a little less crazy now. I think it was in the Daily Show.
I know. We're making them look like they know something, and that's just horrible.
Well, it was on the Daily Show. They said the good news is you're not paranoid. You can come out and say, "I've been telling you for years, and now." But sorry, go ahead.
We don't want to talk about the NSA program too much, but I've always said, like, so what if they're watching me? There are so many people out there to watch. There's not enough people to do all the watching, to care about what I'm doing. I'm like the least interesting. I drive 10 miles over the speed limit. That's come get me for that. And put a tracking device in my car that finds me for it, and I'll start driving the speed limit, and the roads will be safer for it, and that would be cool. But I just don't worry about people. Like, if anything, I want cookies and stuff, so I'll only get the advertisement that I care about. I don't want. I'm sick of like breast augmentation emails. You know, I'm happy with my chest, and I target other parts of my anatomy if you want my money. And so I don't know. If people are in an uproar that someone is watching what we're doing, in the meantime, we're trying to be the most watched generation of humans ever. Like everything is on Facebook, everything's on MySpace, everyone's got a blog. It's all me, and like what I'm doing. But I don't know. Only I want to be in control of that or something. I don't know. I don't get it. I just am not worried about this at all. If it can, look, we, you know, the other thing about this is it's probably not going to stop anything from happening because our procedural work when it comes to crime prevention just seems to be very sloppy. There's an article this week in the New York Times about the Boston bomber who was, people were saying like, hey, he killed these 3 people back in 2011, and the police never investigated. And, you know, the older brother who masterminded these bombings probably would have been in jail for these 3 murders, but they thought they knew what it was about and didn't really do some basic investigation. And so maybe, I don't know, if we could put AI and computers in charge of this, maybe they do a better job of it.
Maybe. I think I have a few objections. One is if you do any banking online and they can see that, then money's going to get stolen. Because the first use the NSA used of their super duper computers was to monitor sex chats between vets and military personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan with home. That's the first way they used it.
Sex chats?
Yeah. The military would call home.
With their wives or with like 1-900?
Well, I think it was actually with their wives, but I might be assuming that.
Oh, who wants to watch that? I guess it goes back to Hoover. The people who want to listen in, I guess they have funny taste in what they would want to see.
Yeah. There was actually a great Penn and Teller used to do a great show called Bullshit, and I highly recommend
I love
it.
that show.
Oh yeah, well they did a great thing about surveillance, and they took these people going, oh, you've got to watch this house because we suspect there are terrorists in there and lives are in the balance, and then they gave them some sex drama to watch in the house next door, and they totally missed the guy walking into the car driving away because they kept on moving the camera over to watch this woman saying calling this guy out who was cheating on his wife and blah blah blah. So
that's awesome.
It was awesome. I love that show.
Maybe the whole porn industry is a cover for terrorist activity. Maybe that's what. Maybe if Al Qaeda wants to get away with stuff, stop covering up your women.
Well,
that's why you're standing out. We only see you're crazy. Because
I see what you mean.
There's no sex in your country. Like maybe we have just as many crazy people running around here, but we can't tell because everyone, there's just sex everywhere.
Well, somebody was saying in order to find the needles in a haystack, you have to have the haystack. But the problem is they've got way too big a haystack, so they've got too much to search. It's and the other thing, as a novelist, I feel like for my first book, I researched how long is it. I googled how long is the boat ride from Cuba to Florida, and as soon as I did that, I thought I'm going to be explaining this to some customs officer or NSA agent when I try to get on a plane someday.
Oh, I've heard this about novelists. It's like, and I saw a cartoon about that recently. I think it was after the NSA thing, and it's like, look, I'm not a serial killer. I'm doing research for my crime novel.
Yeah,
because you were like absolutely crazy if you were doing a crime novel. I called a friend of mine who's a chief medical examiner for Manhattan when I was doing. It wasn't even iZombie. It was one of the Shift books where people were dying and their bodies were decomposing naturally. And I was like, so how long would it take and what's the consistency? And he was like, yeah, so, human fat is like yellow cottage cheese and this is how it would taste and feel and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, you sound, but this is what he does all day. He cuts open bodies and, does autopsies. But yeah, a Google search for that kind of thing. And you might have someone knocking on your door worried about you.
We're on the list. If you're a writer, you're already on the list because you've already researched something. Before we go, I wanted to ask you about Under the Dome. How do you? A quick story. My wife finally said, you've got that copy of Under the Dome, and it's been on TV. Could I borrow your book? It's the hardcover. And the thing is, my wife reads in bed and she falls asleep. And I said, "You are going to kill yourself. It's like two
It's
bricks.
unsafe.
You're going to break your nose at least. You're going to give yourself a concussion. Because every night you fall asleep reading, and it's like
It's a
it
brick.
could seriously do you some damage. This is on the End of the Dome is Under the Dome is the best argument for ebooks I've ever seen. So so let's that aside. I had to get that out of my system. Are you watching Under the Dome? What do you think of the adaptation? Blah blah blah.
I haven't seen it. I need to set it up to record. I've been out of town for a couple of
Oh
weeks,
right, of course.
and I haven't actually. My wife and I don't watch much TV anymore. Very rarely get a chance. But the previews that I saw for it looks great, like a new Lost, a kind of character-driven, strange happenings sort of drama. So I'm interested in it. I haven't read the book,
Oh,
so
you
yeah.
you've got to read the book. It actually is a callback to something we talked about earlier. I think it took him too long to write the book. I love the book, but somewhere in there, around a page 1,000 or so, there is some really vague allusion to a force for good that is ill-defined. And when you read it, you kind of go, is he talking angels or God or what's happening there? And then it's like it's forgotten and you never see anything about it again. And when I read that, I love the book. I really enjoyed it. I love a lot of Stephen King. And but it really struck me that it took him so long to write this that he had an idea one day and it just somehow got lost and nobody edited it later or put something in to justify it, or it was just something that kind of bothered me after the end of it. And I thought if he could just if he could just type a little faster, he would have had it all together in his mind at once. And
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
in
that's what you're talking
that
about.
book, he wrote the first half, and then I think he went like 10 years before he wrote the second
Oh,
half.
I didn't know
And
that.
I've heard. You might have checked the numbers on that. It might have been 12 years. I don't know how long in between. And I've heard from people who've read it that they could see the stylistic difference. That it's very much his old style for the first half, and that was their favorite part. And the second half had a different feel. So there is definitely an argument with that book that delaying finishing a work might ruin the consistency of it. But I can't speak on that definitively because I haven't read it. I can only say what I've heard from other people.
And
But most likely I'll watch the show and then I'll read the book afterward, just because I don't normally do that, but that will probably happen in this case.
well, I think some authors have certainly done it. Like William Styron comes to mind with Sophie's Choice. Obviously, it took him about a decade for each book. I think he's the exception to that rule about writing fast. I think, or writing faster, I think is helpful. But I wanted to ask you about with wool because I've had you on for like an hour and a half. We haven't talked about wool at all, really. Are you kind of a Scott Sigler kind of guy where you pay attention to current science research, or do you pay attention to futurists, or is it all just you? What's your process
I
preparation?
Man, I pay attention to both. I read a lot. I mostly read nonfiction. I try to keep up with science research. I read a lot of journals and articles and websites. I mean, Ars Technica and places like that will send, this gives me a snippet, and then I'll go into the original source and read about latest trends in planetary astronomy and space exploration and nanotechnology and robotics. But I'm just a geek for that stuff and always have been. But I also read a lot of history, and I get most of my knowledge of people and psychology from business books, psychology books, philosophy, history, and that informs my writing. What the people that are reading Wool and enjoying it generally don't read science fiction, and I'm getting a huge audience of people who don't like science fiction or think they don't until they read this and realize that a lot of it's character driven. There's not any advanced technology in the first 5 Wool books. It's more steampunk than anything else. So, I can write either style. I like young adult space opera, and that uses aliens and spaceships and stuff. But for Wool, it's more a psychological thriller and a drama, and that's because most of my reading is in that vein.
Are you reading any fiction right now?
Most of the fiction I'm reading now is stuff people send to me to blurb. So I have read some stuff. The best thing I've read lately, I picked up because I did a signing at a bookstore in Australia, and the guy who runs the bookstore handed me a proof copy of Max Berry's Lexicon and said, "You should read this," and it blew me away. It's the best thing I've read in a long time. So I've been recommending that to people.
All right. Well, that's awesome. And my last question, do you have a favorite book of fiction?
A favorite what?
Book of fiction.
Book of fiction. I wrote in my review of Lexicon that it may have surpassed Ender's Game and may now be my favorite book ever written. And that's hard to say for a book you've read recently. It takes a while for you to realize it impacted you that strongly, but I had that suspicion when I read the book that it might become my new favorite book. It'll be tested here. I've already read a proof copy. I went and bought the hardback, which I rarely do for any book, so that's a testament to how much I loved it. So I'm going to read it a second time, and that'll give me an idea. My favorite books I've read a dozen times, and
wow.
Those include like Battlefield Earth is a book I can read once a year, and Ender's Game is a book that I can read. It takes me about 4 hours to read it now because you know it so well that it's like watching a movie. You're reading every single word, but you're not having to ever pause and reread a page or slow down. You just know the material so well. You're flipping pages. So
is Battlefield Earth the book much better than the movie? Because
it's one of the best books you will ever read.
Really,
it is unbelievable. Yeah,
okay, I'm going to give it a chance now.
Time Magazine lists it as one of their top 100 novels of all time. I think you have to forget Scientology, and you have to forget John Travolta films, and you have to really remember what this was. This was written to be like a Jules Verne kind of an adventure. It's not. It's a different style of entertainment, and it takes 100 pages to lose yourself in it. And once you do, I think it's just a stellar, imaginative, just filled with great characters, a wonderful piece of fiction.
Hugh, you've surprised me again. I'm going to give it a try, and I'm really interested to check out Lexicon too. That sounds awesome. Hey, you have appeared on the Cool People podcast. Do you know what this means?
Am I cool now?
You're cool.
You know, I don't think been one of the cool kids.
Nobody had any doubt. Come on. I really want to thank you for being on the Cool People podcast. I appreciate your time so much, and it's been a delight. I want to talk to you again sometime because we didn't talk enough about wool. There are going to be people who will listen to this podcast and go, "Why didn't you ask him about this? Why didn't you ask him about more?" It's like
those interviews are out there.
Yeah, well, maybe we explored some stuff that. A little bit different from the other interviews, so maybe that's good. So because you're everywhere, man. You're like the wind.
God, it's crazy.
Well, thanks very much for being on, and I hope to have you again soon.